Willkommen zu einer neuen Folge von Digitale Optimisten. Ich bin Alex und ich spreche in diesem Podcast mit den spannendsten Gründern von Early-Stage-Startups, die noch ganz am Anfang stehen, das nächste Apple, Google oder Facebook aufzubauen. Wenn du schon ein paar Folgen meines Podcasts gehört hast, dann weißt du, dass ich meine Interviewpartner immer nach einer Sache ganz besonders frage, der Go-to-Market-Strategie. Also die Antwort auf die Frage, wie die Zielgruppe überhaupt davon erfährt und was sie davon überzeugen soll, die Produkte überhaupt zu nutzen. Ich weiß es noch, wie ich ganz am Anfang von Codino war, meinem eigenen Startup. Wir nennen es das Lego für Coding und unsere Kunden bauen kleine Projekte wie Alarmanlagen, Keyboards oder andere Sachen und lernen dann, wie man mit Programmierung diese Dinge zum Leben erwecken kann. Mein Mitgründer und ich haben monatelang dieses Produkt entwickelt, auf das wir wirklich stolz waren, aber uns war gar nicht richtig klar, wie wir jetzt eigentlich unsere Kunden finden. Es sind also zwei unterschiedliche Dinge. Product baut ein Produkt, das nützlich ist für die Zielgruppe, und Sales macht dann die Zielgruppe zu Kunden. Mein heutiger Gast, Shruti Kapoor, kümmert sich mit ihrem Start-Up Wingman um Zweiteres. Sie will jeden Mitarbeiter im Vertrieb besser machen, indem sie ihnen einen AI-gesteuerten Sidekick an die Seite stellt. Dieser Sidekick screent jedes Telefonat und jede Videokonferenz, um den Sales-Mitarbeitern live und in Echtzeit Tipps zu geben, wie sie den Gesprächspartner am Ende der Leitung dazu kriegen, zum Kunden zu werden. Was sie damit aber auch macht, sie sammelt tonnenweise Daten und kann dank dieser Daten ziemlich genau sagen, was einen guten Verkäufer ausmacht. Im Laufe des Gesprächs verrät sie dann auch die zwei Sachen, die den Unterschied machen zwischen Ja und rufen Sie nächstes Jahr nochmal an. Wenn dir diese Gespräche gefallen, dann erzähl doch bitte einer weiteren Person in dieser Woche von diesem Podcast. Deine Empfehlung hilft mir sehr, mehr und mehr Menschen mit diesen Geschichten aus dem Silicon Valley zu erreichen. Das Gespräch mit Shruti habe ich übrigens vor ein paar Monaten aufgenommen, vor der ganzen Corona-Krise. Der Sponsor dieser Folge ist wieder Brain Effect. Brain Effect produziert und vertreibt Nahrungsergänzungsmittel, die dir dabei helfen können, dich besser zu konzentrieren, besser zu schlafen oder mehr Energie zu haben. Wenn du also wie ich den ganzen Tag im Homeoffice sitzt und so ab 15 Uhr ein kleines Energietief hast, dann können dir die Produkte von Brain Effect sicher helfen. Mir persönlich schmecken die Powerballs am besten. Das sind kleine Kugeln aus veganem Eiweiß, die genau in so Situationen perfekt sind. Also, wenn du das mal ausprobieren willst, dann kannst du mit dem Gutscheincode Optimisten20 20% beim Kauf auf www.brain-effekt.com sparen. Die nächste reguläre Folge von Digitale Optimisten kommt wie gewohnt in 2 Wochen und jetzt viel Spaß mit Shruti Kapoor. Shruti, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex.
Shruti, you have a super interesting background. You were in investment banking, you were in venture capital, you worked in business development, and now you're a founder. Could you walk us a bit through your journey, your professional journey?
Sure. And, I've been reflecting on this and thinking about why and what made me get here. I think there is never a clear path to where, you will get in life, but it's probably the last thing I would have imagined myself doing because most of my life I've spent being, I would say in some sense, risk averse. I would defer decisions that seemed like there was a point of no return. And founding a company definitely doesn't seem like one. I started out with investment banking back in 2008. One of the things that I learned during that process was that there was a lot of insights that were valuable that could help you make the right type of decisions if you started out with data instead of with gut. And a lot of times, this is not always obvious, but companies bring in investment bankers or consultants because they want to be able to get better insights from their own data or better benchmarking. Fast forward to a couple of years back when I was working as a sales manager, one of the things that I found really missing was this exact thing, which was benchmarks and good data. that could help me define my decisions as a sales manager. And just to give you an example of the type of decisions that I wanted to be able to make were, I wanted to be able to make decisions from a go-to-market perspective on what type of marketing campaigns are working, what kind of messaging is really resonating with the customer, and all of these things based off of what really the customer is saying. But this wasn't really available to me, right? So all that was available to me were very short notes that salespeople put into the CRM, and every salesperson absolutely hates putting notes into the CRM. So that was my motivation to say, what can I actually bring in data and insights in a scalable manner, not just for myself, but for sales teams at large, using Wingman. And yeah, that was painful enough for me to say, what, even though I have, this is probably the last thing I would have imagined, let me go ahead and do this because I feel strongly enough about it.
Let's kind of get into Wingman, and let's first understand, you already hinted a bit at it, what you are solving for. And I read a wonderful quote about your company, and this is not very data driven, but I think more of the storytelling side. And the quote reads, "Gotham needs Batman, your sales team needs Wingman." I love that quote. I think it's really interesting. What do you do that is so great that you can take it up with Batman?
So I think for me, what Batman really means is, the superhero that's kind of shows up automatically, right? And of course, in the Batman case, you have the Batman symbol that shows up in the sky, and then Batman shows up. But what we really do for sales people and not just sales managers is we show up when they need, when they need help in their day-to-day work. Right. So that's kind of the real parallel, which is you show up without them having to do something extra. And in our case, what we do is our bot listens to the conversation on a sales call, and based on what the salesperson or the prospect are talking about, it shows cue cards to the salesperson that help them navigate through difficult situations, or help them with suggestions on how they could have a better conversation, or how they could steer the direction of that sales call.
So I can tell you, I've been in sales for a period of time in my life as well. And I can tell you that this would have been golden for me, because just the amount of information that I think sellers are confronted with, be it competition or your own product, the roadmap of your product, or even the tone that you should choose, that would have been incredibly valuable for me. Are you solving for the same kind of thing? So what exactly is in those cue cards that you show to salespeople?
So actually, we look at three different aspects of the conversation. So one type of cue cards are behavior cue cards, right? So those are to the level of, hey, are you talking for too long, or are you talking too fast? And can we help you, kind of create that behavior in a better manner in real time? And then the second type of cue cards are to help people keep a track of their agenda, right? So I want to be able to have people not get carried away into maybe just doing the demo and forgetting to check in with the customer whether that's even relevant, setting up next steps, etc. Right? So you kind of have a guide that's listening in and saying, hey, you've covered of all these points in the agenda, but maybe you have like these other things that are still remaining, and so maybe you want to switch gears. And the third type of cue cards are very much to the effect of informational cue cards, like the type you mentioned. So, is there a new product feature that I need to be talking about in a certain manner? Is there something that's teed up on my product roadmap that might be relevant to this customer? And sometimes the one underappreciated one in this category is also case studies, right? So if maybe I'm a digital marketing business and I'm talking to someone, I don't necessarily want to give them the example of the largest company that I work with, right? I don't want to say that, hey, Walmart is a customer or Google is a customer. What I want to be able to tell the prospect that I'm speaking with is, hey, these are the 12 customers that we work with in a very similar area as yours. They are all in the media and entertainment space, and they are all based in Salt Lake City. Right? Because then that makes it sound like I can really help solve your problem. So those are the kind of things that can really show up, and it's not possible for any salesperson to remember, the context for every single prospect and be prepared for every single call with the right examples, the right information upfront.
So I guess in short, you help, or Wingman helps salespeople become better sellers by giving them a bunch of information. When they're in calls, or let's say calls over VC with their customers, behavioral, keeping track of the agenda, and information like case studies or what has succeeded with other clients. Maybe just to understand the quantum leap. You worked in sales and you were a sales manager too. How do salespeople currently sell over VCs? What's the friction points that people have? What's the situation now without Wingman?
I think it, of course, depends a lot based on the type of sale they are doing and the type of salesperson they are, right? So today, of course, that you have very specialized roles. So you have a role called the sales development rep role, which does the qualification. You have the account executive role, and you also have a pre-sales role. And in some sense, customer success is also doing sales. And we actually work with teams across all four of these layers, right? So today, what happens, and like I said, it varies a little bit from role to role. Today, what happens is that the sales rep, when they come across a question or they are kind of in a situation that's unfamiliar, the way they deal with it is one of two ways. One is they might have, sometimes sticky notes or reference cheat sheets somewhere on their computers that they will go and look for. And it gets really distracting during the call because then they need to search for it. They need to kind of condense the information that they're seeing and talk through it. The second situation is that they go back and tell the customer, hey, you know what, that's a great question. I will come back to you with more details on it. While on the surface, it sounds like the second approach is is acceptable. But really today, because buyers are so much less patient, they're coming in later and later into the journey, it actually has a great impact on whether or not a person makes that purchase from you, right? So that's just an example on the informational type of cue cards. But a great example that I heard from a company that I was speaking with is they also have very specific ways in which they want people to ask how they want to set up next steps. Right. So instead of saying, hey, is it okay if we get on a quick call next week? Versus if they, make it more contextual, saying, hey, based on the discussion that we've had, I think this warrants us to speak for next week and spend more time. The kind of difference they see in the conversion rates for the person actually showing up on the call 1 week from now is humongous, right? So it's just that you can also have very specific words and phrases or the way people are talking through a call script make a huge difference in their outcomes. And today what happens is that people are either stressed out about saying I need to follow a script, or people are ignoring the script saying I need to sound natural. So the idea here is that you kind of strike a balance because people are not having to memorize information and the information is available as and when they need it.
And that is exactly the thing that I find so fascinating about Wingman. If I understand correctly, you basically do two things. The first thing is helping salespeople in the moment be better salespeople. But the second thing that you do is because you listen into all these sales calls, you actually understand what works in sales pitches and in familiar situations.
Exactly. So from a manager's point of view, it's actually about closing the loop completely. So the first step is to help them understand what is a good benchmark for what is working. And secondly, once they understand what are those behaviors that are working, how do you scale that up without the manager having to listen in on every call or being present on every call and whispering over their sales rep's shoulder? And so the idea is that you kind of give them the insights and the data on the first aspect. That helps both the manager and the sales rep get aligned on what is a good behavior. And then how do you then scale up those behaviors?
From the data that you've collected, have you learned what are the biggest mistakes that salespeople make in calls to clients?
It's an interesting question, and of course, there have been different customers who've noticed different things that they were blindsided by in their own sales process. Um, so one of the things that we've noticed that people don't appreciate well enough is the importance of building trust with the prospect. So very early on in a conversation, what would happen is a prospect would ask a question, which might sound like it's a very basic information-based question, right? So they might ask you, "Hey, where's your company based?" Or they might ask you, "Hey, how many people do you have in your company?" Um, and very often that question is not so much about knowing how many people are there working in that company, but it's about saying, "Can I trust this company enough to move forward and do the next steps with them?" And what happens is, especially for inexperienced salespeople, they either look at it as something that is defensive, right? So they go in and say, "Yeah, we are really large," or "Actually, we have blah 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 customers," versus them understanding that the real question is around trust and how do I go in and build trust with the customer. And of course, there isn't a standard answer that works across companies, but the idea that you need to recognize that the one of the biggest hurdles you need to cross early on is building trust, and you need to be very conscious as a company when you set up the script or when you train your salespeople in ensuring that there is a consistent language that they can use to actually deliver the trust message. So that's one. The other one that we noticed recently, again, with a customer that we work with, was blockers are actually great, right? So what we realized was that in all of the sales calls where they converted the sale, they had blockers come up in almost 60% of those calls. And for calls which did not convert and which did not go on to buy from them, that percentage was only 35%. And what that really means is that if a person is not bringing up a blocker, doesn't mean that the blocker isn't there in their mind. And so it's almost again goes back to saying, how do I incorporate that into my call script, and how do I make sure that my reps are actually doing this, because it is uncomfortable. I don't want to necessarily get into a dangerous zone and ask you, "Hey, is there something that's going to stop you from making this purchase?"
That is eye-opening to me, I have to tell you, because what you're saying is trust and being able to, well, proactively address the blockers that these customers have somewhere hidden in their mind, whether they decide to talk about it or not. I can see that those both of the points are probably correlated in a way, because I wouldn't bring up blockers if I don't have trust. And the other thing that I find really interesting about what you just said is, from all the things that that salespeople are trained on, let's say, the product, competitive landscape, it boils down to something that is such a human thing of, in the end asking, is this a person that I want to buy something from? And, you being able to show that in your data is fascinating. Have you incorporated these learnings in some way, and have you seen tangible uplift when you incorporate both establishing trust and addressing blockers proactively?
That's a great question. Do we dog food our product enough? Well, I mean, I would say yes and no, right? So right now for Wingman, there is only one salesperson, and that's me. So there isn't really a use case for us to try and translate these gaps and these type of techniques across a team, and kind of maybe A/B test the messaging, see it across different people. But personally, what I do is I review very frequently what are the things that we are seeing, both as questions that are coming up. So one of the things that the product also allows me to do easily is to kind of see what are the most common customer questions in our conversations, and every time I'm answering that question, when I'm on the call, it might be a much more reactive response. Can I go back and think of again, like a second level response, right? It's the same thing as if somebody's asking me how many people are there in your company, the real question is trust. But in the call, it might be hard for me to, break that down and think of responses at both those levels. So we do that. I don't have exact numbers that I can share with you on how that has impacted our sale, but that has definitely been a guiding light for us when we decide what is, what do we need to do next as a company, whether that is about saying, is this a particular product feature that we need to build out, or this is what we need to be saying on our website, because this is one of the things that people are very curious about, or saying that, this is what we need to build into our FAQs. But it kind of impacts every aspect of the business.
One thing that I want to dive in. So you mentioned what makes a good salesperson a great salesperson. I'm also interested in, maybe on the other side of the spectrum, if there's some traits that make let's say, I don't want to say bad salesperson, but a person that, does not have the highest revenues or success rates, make them, not perform that way. And when you just answered, I always had I was thinking about Amazon's customer centricity, what they kind of put into everything of their thinking. Does that also show in the data that customer centricity is a major determinant of actually making a sale or not?
So actually the question to really ask is, how would you, if you were listening to 10 calls, what would make you think that this person is being customer centric enough, right? And that can express itself in very simple ways, right? But some of those behaviors might be much harder to define as well, right? So one thing would be, have you understood your customer enough, right? And therefore, the information that you're providing to them, is that as contextual to their own problem, to their own situation as it can be. Right. So like I mentioned, the example of bringing up the right type of case studies, the right type of success stories, is really true in that sense, because there are people who are like, I want to be lazy about my approach, and I can't remember all of this information, so I'm going to just go in and talk about these 5 marquee customers with every single person that is on the call if they ask me a question about it. So definitely you see that in the spectrum, which comes in also as how much preparation do people do before they get on a call with the customer. Are they going in saying, hey, can you tell me a little bit about your business? Or are they going in asking people more specific questions saying, hey, I saw that you grew, X% in the last year and you launched this other product. How has that, how has that panned out for you? So that's probably where you start seeing a little bit of customer obsession. And I think one of the things that you mentioned about, bad salesperson versus good salesperson, that's actually not how I look at it, as something that's intrinsic to them. Because when you talk to seasoned sales leaders, very often they'll tell you that some of their best performing people actually had a dip, right? Or some of the people who were going through a bad time, then picked up and went on to do really well. So sometimes it gets into a little bit like a player's form, right? You are in good form, you have a lot of self-confidence, and therefore the way you project and the way you talk, maybe works. But it's also sometimes about just having consistently good or consistently bad habits. And when you're down, you sometimes feel that, hey, you know what, even if I put in that extra effort, it's not going to work. Let me just get on that call. And sometimes when you're in the winning phase, you feel, hey, you know what, my win rate is 35%. This is probably one of the 3 calls that I need to make to get to my next deal, right? So both of those things start playing in. And therefore, I don't think that it's so much about specific traits to them as behaviors that they start demonstrating based on where they are in that cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great addition. And one thing that I wonder about, it's a particular function when it comes to what is the result of this function. It's probably, closing a sale or revenue. You can probably measure that quite easily, but it must be very hard to measure also these behavioral aspects that you mentioned. So how do you go about and contextualize or measure a certain behavior in a sales call? So how do you quantify a qualitative call?
Yeah, so it's it isn't always easy, right? And I think the biggest challenge, and that's in general true for different types of systems that are trying to use intelligence, is to be able to define metrics that are correlated to positive or negative outcomes. But sometimes those metrics, like I said, aren't so black or white. So one of the things that we do is and this varies from team to team. One of the things we do is we actually get the team to pick up maybe a theme or a particular type of thing that they want to improve, or that they just want to are more curious about, that they want to dive deeper into. And then we start digging in with them to say, what are the different ways in which this might present itself, right? So one of those examples could be, how are people handling the objection, or how are people handling the question about authority, right? And I therefore want to be able to see the whole spectrum of every time somebody is, asking someone, are you the right person to make this decision, versus somebody else who might be phrasing this in a much more subtle manner, saying, hey, is there somebody else who needs to be involved? Or someone else asking in a parallel situation, saying, hey, when you purchase this other thing, what did that process look like, right? So there can be multiple approaches, and then you kind of try to quantify each of those approaches and the results that they came up with, rather than trying to say, broadly speaking, hey, are people asking the question about authority? Because each of, like, the vernacular with which people are saying things is almost equally important, if not more so, than what they are saying. So it does tend to get sticky, and therefore I think a large part of the value is not just saying that, I have this post call analytics and I can go and do it, because very often people don't have the patience to dive deep into each aspect of a call, right? So there can be like hundreds of such types of things as you can imagine. And therefore, the idea is to say that, can I actually just instead drive a consistent messaging without making my people sound like robots? And so the way you do that is by making sure that they have the right talking points and the right language show up when they are on the call, and when they're being presented with that situation. And because they're seeing that show up, it is much more easy for them to adopt that behavior, and for you to then go back and measure that once that behavior has been adopted, am I seeing better results?
Understood. When you pitch this idea to investors or your company, it's not an idea, it's a company. What is the one thing that gets them most excited? And I have to tell our listeners that you're a graduate of Y Combinator. You just went through the process. So you're obviously very successful and you convinced a lot of people. But what was it that got them excited?
So I would say two things. One is they feel that it is magical, because it's doing so many things automatically and in real time. And by being magical, it's having a real business impact, because today, the world of sales tools and marketing tools is overcrowded. And what then becomes a big challenge for each of these companies is, how do I drive adoption for these tools? But with a product like ours, because it is real time, the cue cards are showing up as and when it's needed. Adoption becomes really natural, right? So that's something that they find really fascinating. And therefore, the question isn't, will this be useful and will this be used? The question really is, how do I get it in the hands of the right type of people, and what will that look like? The second thing that people find interesting is the fact that CRMs haven't really seen a substantial change in a long time, and CRMs today fundamentally still glorified, Excel sheets in some sense. And so one of the visions that I have with the company is to actually replace the need for people to enter data after sales calls, and to replace, in some sense, the likes of Salesforce. And I think that's, of course, an ambitious and grand vision, but that is something that a lot of investors relate to, also because they internally use CRMs, and they hate that too.
Yeah, that is quite a vision that I think gets probably a lot of investors really excited. I when I was in sales, I always hated it. I had to put in something here. Did I contact this person, or what did I talk about? And just having a smart bot, I guess, at like Wingman to monitor this and making it automatic is, well, that's certainly magical. I can tell you that. And maybe, so what I want to understand is, where do you stand right now? You mentioned that you're the sole salesperson. You're a startup, but maybe you can tell us still where you stand.
Yeah. So, we actually have a team of 8 people working across largely on the product and design side. Unfortunately, or fortunately for the company right now, I am the only salesperson. But one of the things that we've seen is that we've seen interest from customers across different geographies. So we do have customers across US, Australia, and India. And yeah, we, like you said, we graduated from YC in August of this year, and we raised a few $1 million, and are kind of set to grow the team, to grow the product, and of course acquire customers.
Okay, so you and the management team, you got the funding, you're ready to go. Where do you set your current priorities? Yeah, are you building more features? Are you acquiring more customers? Are you adding more staff? Is it a little bit of all, or is there a certain focus that you have?
Yes, of course, it's always a little bit of all, but one of the things that's been our focus is primarily on the customer acquisition piece. And I think what the way we look at it is we should use that as a way to drive, some of the other decisions, including, do we hire one more engineer? Do we hire, somebody else to do, maybe design work or marketing work, etc. So I think a lot of that we want to guide it using, hey, how many customers, what is the revenue, and therefore what should everything else look like. So I think initially when we started out, there needed to be a lag. We couldn't say on day one that only if we have X number of customers will we even start building the product, and therefore did need engineering and resources to get started. But today, I think we are at a stage where we feel that some of those things are kind of in a situation where there is a baseline established, and we should keep ramping up as and when we see the growth on the other side, and when we really see a particular set of features being demanded by customers consistently, to make sure that we are not just building in a vacuum, and we are also then, and I think some of this has also come from the discipline that YC forces into you, which is, hey, have that one metric that you really want to look at, and then let that guide a lot of the other business decisions. And the only real metric, in some sense, is revenue.
When you talk about building the product and adding engineers, can you tell me, is what is proprietary about your approach, and how do you actually do it? I mean, this seems like a high tech voice recognition contextualization software.
Right. So I think there are 3 or 4 different layers. And again, I'm not the engineer on the team. So I'll, kind of keep it high level. I do have 2 co-founders, both of who worked with Google for nearly a decade in the Bay Area before they moved back to India to start this out with me. And so they come with a lot more experience and the ability to talk through this in more detail, but I'll keep it high level. So, a few things that are happening in the system. One is a very basic thing on the voice itself. So we are processing the voice to identify a few different things like who's talking, what is the rate at which they're talking, and how's the conversation evolving? Is it switching often enough, etc. And tracking that in real time. So I would say that that is something that we've built in house. I mean, that's something that we also evolve for each customer, because each customer might have different, uh, accents and different types of people who are selling versus the prospects that they're selling to. So those thresholds keep evolving. The second piece of it, which is the voice to text piece, that isn't proprietary. And then the third piece of it, which is NLP on top of the voice to text piece, that's again proprietary to the extent that we want to be able to identify, objections in general. We want to be able to uh, trigger the cue cards not just based on exact words and phrases, but based on understanding of the context. So that's again something that we've built off of data that we've collected. And then I would say that the big piece that people sometimes miss out is while there is technology that's able to surface these insights and these cue cards, a large part of how useful this is the content that goes into the cue cards, and when do they get triggered. And so a large part of what we do from the proprietary side is also help companies identify what those cue cards need to be based on their own historic customer conversations.
Understood. NLP as natural language processing for anyone who was wondering. Even though you're not the engineer, that was a pretty good deep dive into what you guys are doing. But let's talk about the customer and go-to-market side, because I gather that that's the part that you're in charge or leading at the moment. Let's maybe start at the beginning. I'm fascinated by how these B2B solutions start out, because obviously you didn't have the $1 million funding back then to build all of this that you just described. And I assume you might have had just a scrappy little version and you were looking for someone to test it, I assume. Can you walk us through, these early days of where you had an idea and maybe just a basic MVP? What does that MVP look like? How did you get customers and how did that play out?
So yeah, I mean, I think the story of the first customer for each company is probably different and interesting in its own way. For us, the first customer that started using us was a company called Capital Numbers, who I had worked with previously in my job where I was leading the sales team, and they were one of our large customers. For a very different product. When I had been in touch with the CEO founder of that company, when I told them, what's the next thing I'm doing, he immediately related to the problem and he said, hey, is there a version that I could try out? And we literally, like you said, hadn't really finished building the product yet. And we were like, you know what, we'll be happy to ship this out to you. And what was great about that experience for us was because we had a small team to test this out with, where the CEO was very invested in in the growth of his team. It became a great channel for us to quickly start getting feature requests to kind of see how people are actually using the product, what is working. And incidentally, for them, in just the first quarter of them using it, they doubled their conversions with the simple insight that their sales reps weren't handling the trust issue very well. And then we were also able to show them, how the customer journey was evolving across each different call. How was the set of questions that customers asked changes from the first call to the second call to the closing call. And so that was kind of how we got started. And honestly, I think neither the customer nor we knew what exactly they would get out of it at the end of a month, how their team would engage with the tool. But it landed up being a happy story.
Well, that is certainly a happy story. Doubling the sales of your first client with an MVP. Congratulations. That sounds almost too good to be true. Can you walk us through how the product evolved over time? And especially, which I'm most interested in, how did the customer, the go-to-market and the customer acquisition snowball from there on? How did you grow from your first little MVP, which was already super successful, to the next kind of customers?
Right. So again, the first few customers were through people that we had spoken to when we were trying to validate the idea, people from the network. And one of the things that we realized, and the first story was a happy story. The second story wasn't as much of a happy story. This was a much larger company. There were a lot more salespeople, and there was a lot of structure in the team. And therefore, what we initially had, our hypothesis was that if you actually have dedicated resources to coach a sales team, you have, multiple layers of managers. That would be an ideal use case for a product like ours. And at that point, the product was simpler, right? So there wasn't any real-time cue cards component to it. It was largely about helping companies understand insights from the customer conversation. So it was more on the analytics piece. What we realized with working with this second customer was that we didn't see as much engagement with the product, and that was because there were multiple layers of managers. They all had different priorities at any given time. Listening to customer calls and coaching wasn't the highest priority on a given day. And as we started talking to people who had, done call reviews and coaching in the past, one of the things that we realized was um, that is generally true. While people will not like to admit that they are not, coaching their sales team, it does happen more often than not. And so this actually gave us the trigger to think about the next product idea, or rather the extension to the same idea, which is can we actually make the sales managers' feedback process scalable? Because when we started talking to people, to sales managers, one of the common, points of feedback that they were giving their sales teams was, "Oh, my salespeople talk too much," or they would be like, "Oh, we also create these competitor battle cards for them, and they find this useful, and otherwise they don't talk about competitors the right way." And that was how we said, you know what, if there are themes that are common and recurring enough, can we scale them up so that they would show up automatically? So I don't need a sales manager to tell me that, you spoke for 80% of the time on this call. What I can instead do to make everybody's lives better is to tell a salesperson who's talking that, you've been now talking for 60 seconds nonstop. Do you want to, maybe pause, switch the conversation? Right. So that was kind of how we actually got triggered into thinking about the second aspect of the product that we deliver today.
Okay, so you have the MVP was a great success. Second client, not so much. Didn't work out that well, but you used this as a learning experience and thought about, well, not a pivot, but a small, next iteration of the product. But during that time when you saw the test with a bigger client maybe not going as well as the first client, did that rattle your confidence in a way? How did you feel then?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, that was fairly early for us. So we didn't know whether, and at that stage you don't have statistical data to say, is this a one-off? Is this just that this client is not in a good space right now? Maybe the team is evolving too fast, or is there something core to my product? So I think that it's kind of easy to try to brush some of those things aside. But the way we looked at that was, we said, you know what, let's look at not just this one company in isolation, but can we talk to more companies that might not even be our clients today, but have encountered this problem and tried to solve it, and see whether they've achieved success in doing that. So we actually went and even spoke to a lot of companies who were using some competing products and got feedback from them on how they were using the product or not. And it did two things. One is it told us what was the promise that people were buying the products for, and two, were they actually able to leverage that promise or get the delivery on that promise. And so in that sense, initially it was definitely, something negative for us. But as we started speaking to more customers, and, even outside of our own customer ecosystem, what we learned was it wasn't specific to our own company or to our own product. It was generally more a behavior issue.
So fast forward to now. You acquired funding, you graduated, I guess the most prestigious accelerator there is in the world. You're in a totally different world. I guess you're thinking now about how do we actually scale B2B sales yourself? How do you think about your go-to-market strategy now?
So the way we don't have a clear answer to it yet, and the only answer that we have to it is to experiment and fail fast on the different experiments that we do. And so the way we look at the go-to-market strategy today is what can we break down into smaller components as hypotheses that we want to test out and then decide whether it's working or it's not working. It's not so much about saying, hey, I know that this is my customer segment and this is my exact messaging. For us, we are at a stage today where our go to market is more about saying, hey, this is the reason why somebody would want to buy this product. Maybe they have a huge information gap, right? Maybe they're hiring too fast, or maybe they have a very complex product. But within that, there could be multiple segments, right? So the way we think about it is to come up with those high level hypotheses and then to say, what are the specifics with which we could test this hypothesis. So that's kind of how we are looking at this today. And so our focus right now is to quickly run these experiments and keep learning from each one. And this is, at the level of what is the channel through which we reach out to these customers, what is the segments of these customers, and also what is the messaging for each of these customers. So we're trying to do some limited experiments without, of course, stretching ourselves too thin on all three dimensions.
Interesting. That makes a bunch of sense. So breaking out in hypotheses, testing it, learning what works and what doesn't. But still, you need some data in order to prove or disprove these hypotheses. So how do you at scale? I mean, maybe are you running, I don't know, LinkedIn campaigns to test the click-through rate of certain messages and certain audience groups? Or I mean, how do you put data to these hypotheses to say this is going well or not?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. And so the way we are looking to do that is, of course, through different campaigns, both on the outbound and on the inbound side. So on the outbound side, what are the different segments that we are reaching out to over email or LinkedIn, and what are the response rates we are getting from them. And on the inbound side, we are now in the process of bringing in, someone to help us with actually doing some level of SEO, SEM, and generally experimenting with different channels or different types of content. And again, the metric there to be measured at the first step is to just say what has generated interest to get people to the next level of the funnel, rather than to maybe immediately say what has generated enough interest to get people to close. And the reason for that is, because there are different things that need to get addressed at each point in a buyer's journey. Right. So the first level when you decide to click or not click on an ad is whether that messaging was relevant to you. When you decide to engage with the company, you are making a judgment on multiple other things, right? Like, will I have budget to even consider this? Do I even trust the company enough to engage with them? Maybe leave my email ID here. So if you start trying to measure everything from start to finish, it's probably hard to figure out what was the message that worked or didn't work. And so we try and kind of look at it as let's start from the top of the funnel and then from a customer journeys point of view, and then keep going down as we learn from what the different decision criteria are in a buyer's head as they go through that journey.
Understood. So, generating data where you can with email, LinkedIn, SEO, SEM, but in the end, it's always gut feeling at some point. I think that is always going to be involved. I see your point. So now you got an investor, you got funding, you ran through the Y Combinator. How has having an investor changed the way that you personally lead the company?
I think it's too early to say. But of course, I mean, I think one thing, and we've actually had an investor who supported us from our very, very early days as well. So in some sense, we've never really been in a situation where we were a formal company and we didn't have an investor. So maybe it doesn't change as much for us. But I mean, I think there's definitely external accountability helps with two things. One is, it kind of creates the artificial deadline of saying, what, I need to be looking at it month on month, because sometimes when it's an informal structure, it's easy to say, yeah, you know what, I have these interesting things in the pipeline, they will close at some point. But when you're sending investors like a monthly update, you kind of are looking at it as saying, hey, did this actually happen this month, or did this not happen that I promised? And I think that also helps you create accountability with others in the team as the team grows. So yeah, but I would say overall it's been good to also have investors as people who can quickly give you access to a knowledge base of things that other startups go through, which sometimes can be much more challenging and can be a lonely experience. And of course, the Y Combinator community is great at that, but every company has a slightly different situation. Like our setup of having part of the company in India while selling to the US market is something that's probably different from most other companies that go through the Y Combinator program. So I think if you pick the right type of investors, they also give you access to the right type of knowledge base and, in some sense, experience repository.
Okay, we are now moving to the rapid fire questions, where I guess, as you can tell, just a bunch of questions. Be as brief or as long as you'd like to be. We talked about that Wingman is the Batman of CRM softwares or sales software. But who is your favorite superhero?
Batman.
There we go. It could only be Batman. Why did you change the name from Strings.ai to Wingman?
Just easier for people to understand the value of the product.
What are the things you look for when you decide to hire a person?
The most important one is that they don't sweat perfume.
They don't sweat profusely?
That they don't
perfume?
sweat perfume. That they're able to actually be self-critical, and that they're aware of what shortcomings they have.
Ah, got it. I didn't know that term. Sweat perfume. Learn something new. That's wonderful. How do you unwind?
Board games.
Board games. What's your favorite one?
Puerto Rico.
If I haven't played that one, I only play Settlers of Catan when I play. What is the number one thing that is on your mind when you wake up in the morning and think about Wingman?
How do I get my next customer?
Do you have any book tips for our listeners?
Not directly related to business, but in terms of thinking about life and future in general, I think Homo Deus was really, really insightful.
Homo Deus. Wow. Yeah, that is a wonderful book. I agree. I can only recommend that to everyone. Really insightful. So you were an investment banker at some point, and maybe you, as we said, you dreamt about entrepreneurship at some point. Maybe already knew that you would be an entrepreneur in your later career. But what is your number one advice to people in the situation that you were a couple of years ago, maybe in investment banking or in any other company, who have that same itch for entrepreneurship?
Find your wingman before you start. So it's really important that if unless you are really sure you want to do this solo, it's really important that you find the right co-founders to dive into an idea with.
And how do you know that you found the right one?
That's actually pretty hard, but I'd say that maybe the only practical piece of advice that I've come across, and that is to work on a few projects with them. And you don't know which one is going to be the right one, but the ability to be able to evolve and not to get stuck on a particular idea, but to get stuck on saying that I want to do something on my own, and this is the team that I want to do it with is much more important. So maybe experimenting with a few short projects and therefore learning how flexible people are and their ability to move on.
What accomplishment are you most proud of?
I think the best is yet to come.
That's a wonderful answer. How do you define success personally?
I think the way I define success in a work context is, or rather maybe even everything, is what makes you feel most excited and alive. And if you're able to find those things consistently on a, it's not going to be 100% of the time, but if you're able to find those things that work for you 70-80% of the time, then I feel that I'm being successful.
What is the skill you admire most in others?
The ability to say no.
2 more questions. We're almost there. Home stretch. What is the biggest challenge that you think you will need to solve in 1 year from now?
I think 1 year from now, it'll be more around, version 2 of the company with respect to scaling processes. Right now, things can be a lot more informal, but I think putting processes in place and getting existing people who, sometimes early employees in a startup join a startup because they wanted to run away from processes, but being able to, do the balancing act between saying that you need a process to be able to grow, but you still need to be able to retain your employees and keep the things that they like in place.
That is a whole tangent in itself. I think we could spend another 10 minutes on that. And I find it personally really interesting how startups actually, make that switch. So maybe we have to talk again in a year to see how that worked out for you. My last question that I ask every guest on this show is, what is the best advice that you've ever received?
Listen to everyone, but take what applies to you. Or rather, let it in from 1 year, let it out of the other. I think that's the best advice that I've heard.
I love it. Shruti, this was I thought this was a fantastic conversation. I learned so much about so many things. First off, what I did wrong when I was in sales and how shitty it was, how the processes were that I was in. And I wished there was a product like Wingman out there that would have helped me, to not have to memorize battle cards or competitive information and all these kinds of things. So I think a lot of salespeople will be thrilled to hear that you guys are striking it big and hitting it big, hopefully soon. Thank you so much for coming on, and I wish you all the best for Wingman and yourself.
Thanks, Alex. It was absolutely a pleasure speaking with you. I enjoyed the conversation too.
So, hier ist wieder Alex und das sind die 3 Dinge, die ich gelernt habe aus dem Gespräch. Erstens, it's about trust. Shruti sitzt auf einem echten Datenschatz. Sie weiß nämlich aus vielen, vielen Gesprächen zwischen Käufern und Verkäufern, was Verkäufer erfolgreicher macht. Überraschenderweise, oder vielleicht auch gar nicht so überraschend, ist es am Ende aber nicht irgendein kaltes Verkaufsargument, sondern die Fähigkeit des Verkäufers, Vertrauen aufzubauen. Jede Frage des Käufers hat deshalb 2 Ebenen. Glaube ich dieser Verkäuferin, was sie sagt, und vertraue ich ihr, dass sie mir keinen Mist andreht? Zweitens, Daten. Shruti ist eine sehr rationale Gründerin. Einige meiner Fragen hat sie ganz ähnlich beantwortet. Wenn ich es nicht weiß, dann mache ich kleine Tests und lasse die Daten mir sagen, was der richtige Weg ist. Solche A/B-Tests sind nichts Neues im Product Management, aber Shruti macht das auch, wenn sie zum Beispiel überlegt, ob sie mit einer anderen Person ein Start-Up gründen möchte. Daten sammeln mit kleinen Projekten und dann auf dieser Basis entscheiden. Drittens, don't sweat perfume. Du hast es gehört, ich kannte diese Redewendung nicht, aber sie hat mir wirklich gefallen. Am Ende möchte Shruti nicht in Schönheit sterben, sondern jeden Tag ein Stückchen mehr ihre Firma aufbauen. Ohne viel harte Arbeit geht es nicht. Wenn dir der Podcast gefällt, dann freue ich mich sehr über deine Bewertungen auf Apple Podcasts oder eine E-Mail an alexander@digitaleoptimisten.de. Das war's für heute. Vielen Dank fürs Zuhören und bis in 2 Wochen mit einer neuen Folge.